So thank you so much for coming today, Steve, and joining us. We appreciate it. Steve is the president and general manager of J Peak, and they have done a what we think is a stellar job with introducing a new program called the Mission Affordability Program. So Steve, would you mind telling us a little bit about what that includes?
Yeah, sure. It's essentially across the Pacific Group enterprise. The resorts are either freezing or reducing just about all of their products, from non-margin products like admission, season passes, lift tickets, water park passes, ice rink access, those sorts of things, but also margin products like food and beverage, mainly food and beverage items that, even though our suppliers are for the most part, keeping their prices on goods the same, we are either freezing or reducing prices in those areas that ultimately the guest sees. So we sort of started this about a year ago, where we had conversations with ownership about, the reality of inflation and what both the reality of inflation is doing to our consumer and our guests' pockets, but also what the theory of inflation is doing to their mentality about traveling in the first place. For the most part, like you and I had talked about before, the guests that are going to spend 4 and 5 day ski vacations, snowboard vacations for $4,000 or $5,000, the fact that bread is twice what it was a loaf from 2 years ago isn't going to impact that. But the theory that a company is acknowledging what inflation is doing to the U.S. consumer, just the theory of that and just the acknowledgement that a company is acknowledging that, we reasoned would play well with our guests, who would acknowledge the fact that, hey, we're at least trying to do something about this.
It doesn't sound like it was terribly hard for this to be adopted as both a business and a marketing strategy. How did it factor into your forecasting for the season?
Well,
I go ahead.
things you just said is very important. It's a business and a marketing strategy, right? From a business perspective, we just think it can make good sense because it will drive volume, right? I mean, we'll lower our ADR in lodging. We will lower our net yield most likely in some of our food and beverage services, but because volume, we reason, will come to our rescue, we're going to make out okay. But without the marketing piece of this, it doesn't work as well as it should, right? We can't simply lower prices and hope people pick up the phone and say, well, shit, that's a $19 savings over Resort X. You needed to take what we were doing and then tell the world about it to the best extent that you can. And you have to do it in a way that doesn't seem like you're really pandering, right? Because we're not simply lowering prices because we think, that there's some intrinsic good to it. There's a means to an ends here. But you really don't want to come off like that. So you've got to package this in a way that makes sense to your brand, but you have to do something with the marketing of this. You can't just let people walk in and say, wow, that was $1.50 less than I expected to spend on a cheeseburger. It doesn't really work that way. But ownership of PGR immediately got their heads around this. And our expectation a year ago is that some of the bigger destination hospitality brands would be doing this. You would look at cruise lines, you would look at Starbucks of the world, you would look at some of the fast food chains, maybe going back to an emphasis on dollar menu pricing or $5 footlongs or all of that. Chipotle having less on their bowls or whatever the hell they sell. You thought that some of that would be happening. I think you're starting to see that in the markets now. If you're paying attention to this sort of thing the way we are, you're starting to see some of these brands say, let's at least position ourselves as being cognizant of what the hell is going on around us.
The expectation around, especially for you with COVID and the borders closing and other issues, that the knee-jerk reaction is to drop prices. But there was an interesting sort of factor for us in the ski industry. COVID was great for business.
It was great for business because it got, people were jammed up and they wanted to get the hell out of the house. But what it really did was fill their pockets full of money. So, when we came out of the pandemic, our conversations internally were, we need to get the notion out that we are open for business at 100% and let the consumer come and vote based on price. We knew that they had money and they were willing to spend it. We're out of that cycle by a long stretch at this point. That money's gone for a lot of consumers. Again, not necessarily the ski consumer that's a little bit more affluent than Joe Q public, but the reality is that is the narrative everywhere. It's that expensive, 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 and to not mention that at all would seem a little tone deaf to us. A year ago, we were completely convinced that Disney was going to react to this, that they relied on the ticket sales, admissions as a huge driver of their overall profitability, and they needed to protect that. So we thought that they would do something on multi-day rates, or at least we didn't know what they would do specifically, but we thought that the message into the market was going to be, we are acknowledging inflation and we still want you to have that dream vacation. We really haven't seen that out of them. And there's some of the bigger, more expensive brands like Starbucks, we sort of expected to see a little bit more out of in terms of addressing this full forward, but you haven't really seen that yet. But you are, like we talked about, there are some other brands who are starting to get out and get into this. And we just wanted to get out as early as possible and not feel like we were chasing everybody else.
Tell us about how, if at all, the lower snow of the past season had any influence on this decision.
Yeah, it didn't have any influence whatsoever. It was, we ended up netting out at, I think less than a foot off of our 10-year rolling natural snow average. We rolled into April 1st and we were more than that behind, but we had, 30, 40 inches in April. We also had that eclipse and drove revenue like crazy. So that didn't factor into our decisions at all. Now we do have resorts in the enterprise that had really bad snow years, and they are trying to compete on price right now, acknowledging how bad that snow year was, and the response so far has not been great. I think that there's something that a lack of snow does that price can't solve for you. And then the canary in the coal mine really is that season pass sale, because that's the first time resorts will go into the markets asking for consumers' commitment, not only their money up front, but really that commitment that they're going to spend the season with you. Our season passes at this point are up almost 25% up, and most of our season passes are sold at this point. We got out in front early, and I expected that pace to erode as we got into the sales season. I thought we just pulled some of that revenue forward, but the gains have held on, and I think that relates to having a very good snow year last year and freezing prices. That combination of the two is really helping to insulate us. The other canary are the lodging reservations for the holiday periods, because this is the time of year people are booking that, and typically we are into like 10 to 12% ahead of the year prior. Just seemed like combining volume and yield, we see a 10 to 12% jump. We're in the low single digits. We're at 3-4% ahead. So our team is a little bit blue about that. And I'm trying to say, listen, according to the folks in our competitive set who are flat to down, I'll take 4%. But there are definitely this year is going to be trench warfare, trying to get these skiers to come out and trying to get them to stick to I think the length of stays that we're used to seeing.
Which is, how has the marketplace reaction been so far? I mean, I know it's hard to isolate that this one program has driven that when you did have a good snow year, but it seems like the press and the PR pickup that you guys have got on this has been really nice.
Yeah, it has been. It's tough to really quantify that. You get somebody on the phone who's booking a vacation and they may mention something about, hey, I've heard about this mission affordability piece. You don't know how much it drove the call, or you don't know how much it drove them saying yes to the final bill. But the fact that it's at least being acknowledged, you reason that it has to be in there someplace, right? Thanks, Stu, and good luck to everybody this year.